Have you ever felt that something was left unfinished with someone who passed away? That final conversation that never happened, the words of love or forgiveness left unsaid. In this video, we'll hear the story of someone who, after falling into a coma, had the unique opportunity to reunite with their loved ones who had already passed on. Imagine feeling a profound sense of peace, reliving memories, and finally finding the emotional closure so many of us long for. If you carry the weight of loss, this story could be a step toward healing from grief and finding spiritual strength. Allow yourself to journey through this experience and discover how reconciliation can bring peace, serenity, and new meaning to your path. Stay until the end. It might be exactly what your heart needs to hear. From a young age, I learned to love deeply. My parents, Helen and Robert, were the kind of people who embraced the world with generosity. I grew up surrounded by warmth and the belief that love was eternal, unbreakable. But that feeling gradually faded, like waves carrying away grains of sand. First, I lost my mother. She left too quickly, leaving behind a void that felt impossible to fill. I was in my early 20s, completely unprepared to handle the loss. Truthfully, I don't think I ever could have been. Her absence left scars that, even with time, never fully healed. To this day, I miss her gentle laughter, her voice singing through the house, and the way she held my hand when she needed comfort. Then it was my brother, Gabriel. He was my best friend, my confidant, the person I shared every high and low with. Gabriel had a contagious energy, a way of seeing life that made me believe anything was possible. But life, ironic as ever, decided to take him early. A brutal accident. The news hit me like a punch in the gut, and suddenly, everything around me lost its color. I felt a mix of sadness and guilt, as though I should have done something to stop him from leaving. It was a raw, cutting pain that settled inside me like a weight I would carry forever. These losses changed me. I began living with a constant ache, a feeling that I hadn't said enough, that I hadn't expressed just how important they were to me. And no matter how much I tried to move forward, part of me remained stuck in the past, reliving moments, searching for answers that would never come. In my mind, I revisit those days when they were here, wondering if they knew just how much they meant to me. Questions left unanswered, whispered only into the void. For a long time, I tried to bury the pain. I threw myself into work, into routines, anything that could help me ignore the emptiness. But even in my busiest hours, the thoughts would come back. At night, when the house was quiet, their absence became unbearable. It was as if I could hear them, feel their presence, but never reach them. This emptiness grew into a weight, a regret that seemed to deepen with time, like a wound that never heals. Then there was my grandmother, Louise. She was the matriarch of the family, the one who taught us the importance of being together, of cherishing each moment. After she was gone, everything changed. Her house, once a refuge of laughter and stories, became an empty space, filled only with echoes of memories. Losing my grandmother felt like losing an anchor. She was the bond that held us all together, and with her went so many moments I thought would last forever. I carry these memories with me, but I can't shake the feeling that something was left undone. A final conversation, words that were never spoken. Life went on, but with holes I could never fill. It was a day like any other, gray and ordinary. I had just left work and decided to take a walk along the shore to clear my mind. I needed the sound of the ocean, the salty breeze on my face. I felt weighed down, as if all the memories and regrets I carried were piling up on that particular day. I walked for a while, lost in thought, until I began to feel strange, a bit lightheaded. At first, I thought it was just fatigue, but suddenly, a wave of weakness washed over me, and my legs gave out. It all happened so fast. I remember reaching for a nearby railing, trying to steady myself, but my vision blurred, and before I could grasp what was happening, my body surrendered. The last thing I heard was the sound of waves crashing, mingling with the increasingly distant chatter of people around me. Everything started to fade away, voices dimming as though someone was turning down the volume on a radio. Suddenly, there was no more pain, only a sense of absolute emptiness. I felt as though I were falling, yet there was no anticipation of hitting the ground. It was a profound darkness, unlike any quiet night. There was no fear, only a strange peace, as if I were floating in a place without time, without past or future, only an eternal present. I had no idea how much time had passed: minutes, hours, days. It was as if the concept of time had lost all meaning. I felt myself being drawn deeper further, until all that remained was silence. As the profound silence began to dissipate, a feeling of lightness took over me, as if I were being carried along by a gentle current. The darkness surrounding me gradually gave way to a soft, welcoming light that seemed to pulse gently, like the rhythm of a calm breath. Slowly, the sense of being in a particular place began to take shape, but it wasn't a physical space as we know it. It was something more ethereal, as if suspended between here and now, yet also beyond any concept of time and space I had ever known. There was an indescribable peace here. The constant pressure I usually felt in my chest, the weight of memories and anguish, all seemed to have dissolved. I felt so weightless that, for a moment, I wondered if I might be dreaming. But at the same time, everything was too vivid to be just an ordinary dream. Every particle around me seemed to vibrate with a gentle, comforting energy. The atmosphere was warm, enveloping, like an invisible embrace that eased all the pain I had been carrying. As I observed my surroundings, I realized there was no ground beneath my feet, no walls, no boundaries. It was a vast space filled with light, but not a harsh light. It was a gentle luminosity that seemed to radiate an ancient, calm wisdom. I felt as though I were in a safe place, almost sacred, with a touch of mystery. It was as if I were in a dimension that existed only between life and death. I tried to remember how I had arrived here, what had happened, but all events before that moment seemed distant, as if they had been erased by this overwhelming peace. Yet, a strange feeling of anticipation started to grow within me, as if something was about to happen. Suddenly, in the midst of that silent peace, I noticed a subtle movement in the light around me. At first, I thought it was just a reflection or a shift in brightness, but gradually, shapes began to take form. They were silhouettes, vaguely familiar, emerging from the light itself. My heart, or whatever form my consciousness took in that moment, began to race. I could hardly believe my eyes. Faces I knew, people who had been so important in my life, now stood before me once again. The first figure I recognized was my mother, Helen. She looked exactly as I remembered, with that calm smile that always made me feel safe, even in the worst situations. Her eyes sparkled with warmth, and she looked at me with a love that only mothers can express. I wanted to run to her, to embrace her, to feel her touch again, but it was as if my movements were guided purely by thought. In that instant, I realized there was no longer a division between body and mind. It felt as though I were made solely of emotions and memories. Beside her stood my brother, Gabriel. He was smiling, with that look that always saw the good in everything, even when things seemed to be falling apart. Just seeing him there, alive and smiling, brought back a flood of memories and longing. I wanted to say so many things, to apologize for not being there enough, for not telling him how important he was to me. But at the same time, it was as if he already knew everything. His smile, the way he looked at me, conveyed a deep understanding, almost as if we were having a silent conversation. And then I saw my grandmother, Louise, standing with her usual strength and serenity, the matriarch she had always been. I remembered how she kept the family together, the pillar of strength for all of us. She looked at me with that tender gaze that spoke more than words ever could. Standing there with her, all the pain I felt from her absence was replaced by a peace I never thought possible. Each of these encounters felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that had been lost over time. The longing and love I felt blended together, creating a feeling that transcended any explanation. I stood there in silence, absorbing every moment, every look, every gesture. It was as if all the unsaid words, all the feelings that had remained locked away, were finally finding their place. In that realm of light and peace, I felt whole in a way I had never experienced before. My mother was the first to speak. Her voice was soft, with the same tenderness as always, but there was something ethereal about it, as if each word was a note in a melody that only my soul could hear. She came closer, and even though I couldn't physically feel it, her presence felt like an invisible embrace. "My son, you know how much I loved you," she began, her gaze full of warmth. "And how much I still love you, even now." My emotions surged, as if everything I had held inside for years was finally finding its release. I looked at her, my voice choked with emotion, and said, "Mom, I miss you so much. There's so much I should have said while you were here. I feel guilty, as if I didn't cherish you enough, as if you left without knowing how much you meant to me." She smiled, the same comforting smile from my childhood, and looked deeply into my eyes. "Never doubt your love, my son. You gave me all you could, and I always knew. Love doesn't need words, it's expressed in so many ways, and you showed me that your whole life." With those words, I felt an indescribable weight lift from my chest. It was as if, finally, I had received forgiveness and confirmation that everything was all right between us. She knew, she had always known. Then Gabriel came forward. His expression was so familiar, that mischievous smile and playful look that always made me laugh. I couldn't hold back the tears. "I'm so sorry, man," I managed to say, trying to keep my composure. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you more, that I didn't tell you how important you were to me. I was selfish, always wrapped up in my own problems." He laughed, a light-hearted laugh that dispelled any shadow of guilt. With a gentle touch on my shoulder, which felt like a soft breeze, he said, "It's okay, man. Life is complicated, and I never expected you to be perfect. You were my brother, my friend, and that's what matters. All the moments we shared. I always knew how much you loved me, and I was there for you too, even if you didn't realize it." Those words sank deep. It was as if the years of guilt I had carried were dissolved by that laugh and his easygoing words. Gabriel knew. He had always known. Finally, my grandmother, Louise, stepped forward. Her presence was strong and comforting, as it had always been. I felt a deep respect for her, a mix of admiration and longing. "My grandson," she said in that calm, strong voice of hers. "Life always goes on, even when we think it ends. Don't grieve over what you didn't do or what you left unsaid. Our hearts know the truths, and mine always knew what you felt." I tried to hold back tears, but they came anyway, silent and filled with a relief I had never known. My grandmother, my mother, and my brother stood there, knowing everything. They knew my faults, my regrets, but also my love and my gratitude for each moment we had shared together. In that instant, I realized that the reconciliation was complete. I didn't need to carry that burden any longer. They had freed me with words of comfort and an understanding beyond anything I could have imagined. It was as if each of them had returned a part of me that I had lost along the way. As each of them offered me words of comfort and understanding, I began to sense a subtle shift in the environment around me. The gentle light surrounding us seemed to vibrate differently, and an odd feeling took hold, as if something were gently, yet firmly, pulling me back. It felt as though that endless peace was preparing me for a farewell. I looked at my mother, Gabriel, and my grandmother, and realized that they too knew our time together was coming to an end. There was no sadness in their faces, only a serene understanding that this goodbye was a natural step, and that our bond would not end here. My mother gave me one last smile and whispered, "You have more life to live, my dear. Don't worry. We'll always be with you, wherever you go." Those words brought a comfort I hadn't realized I needed. I knew that the love we shared would not be erased by the distance between this world and the next. Gabriel gave me a final wave, and I could feel that he was at peace, just as I was beginning to be. My grandmother looked at me with that steady gaze that seemed to pierce through everything, and she said something that echoed deep within me, "Go and take this peace with you. Live with the same strength with which you loved us." I felt a mix of peace and longing, but also a profound acceptance. I knew it was time to go, that I still had life left to live, a path to follow. I closed my eyes, allowing those last images of them to be etched in my memory, each word and gesture held in the deepest part of my heart. When I opened my eyes, the light around me was fading, and with it, the presence of those I loved so dearly. Yet, I didn't feel that I was losing anything. Instead, I was taking with me something far greater than any memory. When my eyes opened, the soft light was replaced by the clinical brightness of a hospital lamp. I blinked a few times, trying to understand where I was, as distant sounds, the beeping of machines, the murmur of voices in the background, began to pull me back to reality. I felt my body heavy, as if I had woken from a deep, endless sleep, but at the same time, there was a new lightness within me, something I had never felt before. I looked around, and soon a doctor entered the room, followed by a nurse who smiled with relief upon seeing me awake. They tried to explain that I had been in a coma, as if that were the most important part, but I knew something far greater had happened. Deep inside, I understood that this experience wasn't merely a side effect of the coma. It was real as life itself. I tried to describe what I had gone through, but the words seemed too small to capture the peace and love that had surrounded me. As the days passed, I realized that the feeling of peace hadn't faded. I was different, transformed. It was as if I had been given a second chance, a fresh start. All the anxieties, guilt, and regrets I had carried were left behind, replaced by a calmness that gave me strength to face life with new eyes. My loved ones, my mother Gabriel, my grandmother, were still with me, in every gesture and thought, an invisible but profoundly real presence. The experience taught me something precious. Life is fragile and fleeting, but the bonds of love are eternal. And no matter how much we face loss and longing, we are never truly alone. They live within us, in our hearts, in the memories we carry, and in the peace we find when we finally learn to forgive and accept. I knew my life would never be the same. Looking back, I realized that experience gave me something I could never have found on my own. A genuine peace and the certainty that love endures, in a way that transcends time and space. I know many live with longing and pain, carrying the weight of unspoken words and moments left behind. But what I learned is that our loved ones, even after they've left, remain with us in memories, in the lessons they taught us, and in the peace that emerges when we finally allow love to fill the emptiness of loss. If you carry the longing for someone who's gone, know that they continue to be present in subtle yet profound ways. Allow yourself to find peace, to understand that love is eternal, and that saying goodbye is simply a transition. After all, those we love never truly leave us. They live on in every thought, in every gesture, and in the calm that lingers when we learn to accept and love without barriers. Did you enjoy the video? Don't forget to leave a like, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful content like this. Stay tuned for upcoming videos with tips and strategies to enhance your journey.